All right, so we're going to get started. So thank you for joining us. Welcome. Today's webinar is presented by SAMHSA's Game Center with the support of SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Today's webinar is In Transition, Strategies to Promote Housing Through the Reentry Process. Our presenters today are Julia Orlando, Jesse Wilson, and Amy Dean Kampmeyer, and I will introduce them shortly. So I'm Dr. Melissa Stein, a Senior Research Associate at SAMHSA's Game Center and Policy Research Associates. And before we start our presentations, I have a few housekeeping items to review. First, the views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And we do have a Q&A pod down at the bottom of your screen if you have questions for the presenters or in regards to the technology. At the conclusion of the presentations, we will cover as many questions as time permits. We will also conduct a couple of polls throughout the event and appreciate your participation. When you see a poll pop up, please select and enter your responses. This webinar is being recorded and slides will be disseminated via the Games listserv following the webinar. We will also notify you when the webinar recording is posted to SAMHSA's YouTube channel. A certificate of attendance is available for download at the end of the webinar. Please note this certificate is for your personal portfolio use only. We are not able to offer CEU credits. And we do have ASL interpretation for today. Our interpreters for today are Dave Gratzer and Katie Lamb. We also have live captioning for today's event. To view live captioning, click Live Transcript CC at the bottom of the Zoom window and select Show Subtitles. And so just a quick look at our agenda today. Coming up next, we have John Berg providing some opening remarks on behalf of SAMHSA. He'll be followed by presentations from our speakers. And we know at the Game Center that housing issues have long been a challenge for many communities across the U.S. We also know that it can be helpful for communities to have a range of services available for people to meet them where they are in their recovery process. So this webinar will feature Julia Orlando sharing about a low barrier Housing First shelter that is partnered with the local jail. We'll have Jesse Wilson speaking on the Oxford House model and their reentry initiative supporting people coming out of the prisons. And we have Amy Dean Kampmeyer, who will be speaking on the Kansas Department of Corrections and their landlord partnership program. So these presentations will really help you begin to understand the importance of having a continuum of housing services and programs to support people so that they can continue their recovery and to support autonomy in their housing. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to John Berg for his opening remarks. John.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. And good afternoon, everyone, to today's webinar, In Transition, Strategies to Promote Housing Throughout the Reentry Process. As always, we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules to participate in today's webinar. SAMHSA is pleased to provide this webinar that focuses on one of the biggest challenges for organizations assisting individuals returning to the community from incarceration, which is safe and affordable housing. Upon release from incarceration, whether through a drug court or reentry program, or unfortunately for many, no structured or supportive assistance, individuals with behavioral health issues face many barriers to successful reentry into the community, such as lack of health care, job skills, education, and stable housing, which may jeopardize their recovery and increase their probability of relapse and rearrest. Housing is a critical issue that is often identified as one of the most pressing barriers to successful reentry. probably because there are additional challenges for accessing housing, such as not qualifying for Section 8 housing, having a criminal history, lacking income, among many other barriers. Housing stability can affect the prospect of employment, access to services, and other factors that lead to improved outcomes. SAMHSA recognizes the importance of safe and supportive housing for those returning to the community from incarceration, so allows through our discretionary grant program for reentry organizations, funds to be expended for recovery housing. And recovery housing is seen as one component of substance use disorder treatment and recovery continuum of care. Today, we will explore 3 strategies for addressing the housing needs of individuals with mental and substance use disorders following incarceration as they transition through the reentry process and as their needs change. Local programs ranging from a shelter program for individuals with acute housing needs to landlord partnership programs to help house individuals ready for independent living, as well as the Oxford House model will be featured. Potential partnerships to address housing gaps within communities will be explored, as well as strategies to address a spectrum of housing needs among individuals with mental and substance use disorders and reentry. We're very pleased to have 3 great speakers today: Julia Orlando, Jesse Wilson, and Amy Dean Kampmeyer present on this very important reentry topic. I want to thank them for sharing their knowledge, expertise, and experiences with their programs. And as always, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Gain Center and their staff for their work in developing and facilitating today's webinar. So at this time, I turn it back to Dr. Stein.
Thank you, John. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our presenters today. Julia Orlando is the director of the nationally recognized Bergen County Housing, Health, and Human Services Center in New Jersey. She led Bergen County in successfully meeting the National Mayor's Challenge to end veteran homelessness, as well as in becoming the first community nationally to successfully reach functional zero for chronic homelessness. And Ms. Orlando serves as the chair of the executive board for New Jersey's largest hospital, Bergen Newbridge Medical Center. Previously, she spent 20 years working in supportive housing in New York City, developing specialized housing and providing mental health training to New York State parole officers. Jesse Wilson is the senior reentry coordinator in North Carolina for Oxford House Incorporated. This is a national nonprofit program of self-run, self-supported recovery residences for those recovering from substance use disorders. And Jesse is responsible, he manages the Oxford House Reentry Program, which assists men and women reentering society after incarceration. He has been in long-term recovery since 2018 and has worked with Oxford House since 2019. And he is a nationally certified peer recovery support specialist. After serving a sentence in the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, his passion led him to work with people to work with individuals transitioning back to the community after incarceration. Next slide. Thank you. And Amy Dean Kampmeyer is the mental health and housing program at the Kansas Department of, she's the mental health and housing program manager at Kansas Department of Corrections, where she has worked since 2012. And she helped develop and implement the Kansas Department of Corrections Family Services for Incarcerated Parents and Families of Offender program. She manages several housing and mental health programs. She is a member of the Kansas Governor's Task Force subcommittees on behavioral health and housing and homelessness. She also serves on the Special Committee for Mental Health Modernization and Reform. So those are some thoughts, some introductions of who is presenting today. And now I'd like to look at who is joining us for today's webinars. And we see that a majority of you are joining us from urban locations, followed by a pretty even breakdown of folks from rural and suburban locations. And in terms of professions, we have about 20% of you joining from corrections, probation, parole, as well as about 27% of you joining from a community-based provider agency. So that could be treatment, it could be social supports, peer support services, etc. We also have a good number of you joining from government, from academia, from crisis services, and law enforcement. as well as the judiciary. So thank you so much for being with us today and participating in our webinar. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Julia Orlando to begin our presentations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stein. It is such a privilege to be here with all of you. I'm going to set my timer here to make sure that I stay on time here. Can you advance the slide for me, please? There we go. So a little bit about my model that I'm presenting today. This is a really interesting model in the sense of kind of looking at where we were and looking at where we are now. Prior to 2009, here in Bergen County, which is the largest county in New Jersey and the most populated with just under 1 million people, we would be considered a suburban environment for those of you coming from that, but we're right outside of New York City. When you drive outside the bridge, you're in Bergen County. So our whole system for the homeless, we had 4 temporary locations. One of them were really trailers. We had, seasonal sit-up. People using drugs and alcohol were banned. It was difficult to access services for them. We had 4 different intakes, limited housing access. And in a county of 1 million people, we only had 8 beds for women. In this new system that we have now, this is since 2009, which is a housing first model. We have a newly constructed facility. We're open 24 hours a day, 365. We are what's called a low barrier. We are coordinated entry now, and we have a prioritized immediate access to housing. And we now have 45 beds for women. So what's integral to our model for the purposes of our conversation today is that at the inception of our design were the thoughts around reentry. Our jail, our county jail, is located directly across the street from us. It has 1,000 inmates. And at the time of us developing our model, the Bergen County Sheriff was very involved in this planning. And the idea was that reentry clients coming out of the jail would be prioritized right from the beginning. Also, nurses from the jail provided services to our center programming when we opened, and they continue to provide nursing services for us now. So this is our beautiful building. What's interesting about it is that when we first opened, we got a lot of criticisms because it was nice. And if you think about it, if you're a homeless person, you don't want to go into a place that doesn't look nice or doesn't look safe or doesn't look clean. So the fact that it's visually appealing is, I think, a large part of our success here. So this facility is actually owned by the County of Bergen, and it's a shared project between the County of Bergen and the Housing Authority of Bergen County. The mission of our facility is to end homelessness by providing a full continuum of housing services, including homelessness prevention, temporary shelter, and permanent placement. So this was a key piece of our 10-year plan to end homelessness, which was sunsetted in 2018. And it is the foundation of a concentrated community-wide effort to find permanent housing for people who are homeless. So I said low barrier. What does low barrier mean? And really what it means is that if you're a homeless person on the street, it's pretty easy to get into our shelter. It's pretty hard for everyone else because you always want to make sure that you have beds available for the people that are unsheltered on the street and the most in need of services. So we use a housing first approach, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that further in the presentation. You want to reduce barriers. In other words, you don't have to have ID to get into our shelter. You don't have to be able to pay for your stay. We want to make sure that if you're on the street and you're from Bergen County, you're going to be able to get into our facility. We provide consistent, coordinated, creative outreach. We engage and support our public housing authority. I actually am an employee of the housing authority, which is a really interesting model, that the person who runs your shelter also works for your housing authority. If you think about homelessness, what do people who are homeless need? They need housing. And who has housing? Housing authorities. So it's actually a perfect marriage in design. One of my biggest jobs is setting and holding partners accountable. That's not an easy job, and it doesn't always make you the most popular person, but it's really integral in this work, is that accountability. We use assessment tools that are really tailored to the kind of work that we do. We still use a VI SPDAT, but we have modified it really for our use. We maintain community-wide lists. We monitor progress of people in shelter from 30 days in shelter to 60 to 90. We're an emergency shelter, so people really shouldn't be here for more than 90 days. It's important to collect good data and to facilitate exit to permanent housing as quickly as possible. So one of the things that I do in my role is to really mitigate risk. If we're going to talk about reentry clients and you're talking about a county facility, mitigating risk is probably the largest part of your job. So that's important because we are sheltering high-risk individuals. So it's important to manage non-compliance to medication, non-compliance to treatment. We offer assisted outpatient treatment, which is AOT and supervision for our most difficult to manage clients. We work actively with the community, meaning law enforcement, we have 70 municipalities in Bergen County. That means 70 different mayors, 70 different council people, police departments that I'm working with on a daily basis. And again, the key to really mitigating risk is to expedite housing. That's really always got to be your focal point, is expediting housing. We have our partnership with the Bergen County Jail. So it's very unique because of our proximity to it being right across the street. So in the design of our center, people exiting the jail are given priority access to the shelter to prevent recidivism. We do in-reach into the jail. We receive referrals prior to release, and then we work closely with different agencies that work with folks in reentry. These agencies' clients are put on our housing prioritization, or HPL, while they're incarcerated. So they're already in the housing queue while they're incarcerated. We have security officers that do tours of the center daily and are our first responders. And the sheriff officers do walkthroughs every day. And they do walkthroughs with canines about once a month for unannounced spot checks of the center. So how does this model benefit our justice system partners? Well, we're a one-stop location. And a one-stop location is more effective, it's less time consuming, and it cuts down on transport. Think about it, if you're a probation officer, you have to get your person benefits, you have to connect them to services, you have to get them mental health treatment, drug treatment, all of these different things. When that person comes into our facility, we do all of it. So for that probation officer, really getting them into our facility is a win-win, because the person's going to get all the services that they need. The probation officer doesn't have to spend their valuable critical time with a large caseload getting all that done. All of that's going to get done here right on site. And while a shelter is not optimal, it is better than an unsafe environment where maybe the person's staying at home where there's abuse, there's drug use, or potential violence. In-reach and referrals in advance allow for better reentry planning. And our AOT model results in an 80% reduction in hospitalization over the past 6 years. We have constant communication because we're a one-stop model. Everyone has my cell phone. We're always doing interventions on the weekends. We're never not open for business. We strategize and negotiate through planning before meetings and weekly clinical meetings. The staff do not lose a sense of urgency. That's, I think, the most important thing in shelter. You should always have a sense of urgency. We need to get people in fast and get them out to housing even faster. Providing training for Code Blue policy and procedure is very important in the winter months. Foster a culture of trying to make it work. So we're not looking at clients like, I can't take this client because of this. The question is always, what do I need to do to be able to safely shelter this person? Having support, faster access to services like DVR and benefits. All of those things happen on site here. And developing a rapport and trust amongst our providers, which enables access for difficult or high-risk clients. There's additional benefits because we can help get people jobs. We know people who are hiring. The Housing Authority of Bergen County, my employer, considers subsidies for those previously incarcerated and will make exceptions for those who agree to treatment or aftercare. We've cultivated relationships with landlords who know people have criminal histories and bad credit and will still work with us. And the center participates in the county's crisis intervention training program, the CIT, which provides shelter with guest speakers, a presentation and tour for those law enforcement officers, and focuses on that relationship building with local law enforcement. It is an incredibly effective model using CIT. Just very quickly to kind of look at the cycle of homelessness in jail. So we have, over enforcement and criminalization of the homeless, which exposes them to living outside, to frequent police contact, and citations for low-level charges, which then consequently there's warrants and arrests, which are quickly triggered by unpaid fines, missed to court dates, which leads to longer periods in jail, which leads to increased obstacles and restrictions on release from jail. So reentry planning should begin on the day of incarceration. This is so important to ensure a successful transition and reduce recidivism. So we want to make sure that the primary focus is to remove and reduce barriers by building partnerships with housing assistance agencies, vocational and homeless assistance agencies. This all has to start right from referral. You want to know things like, did they experience homelessness before incarceration? Will they return to homelessness upon release? Was this person a frequent user of services? Do they need interventions? Do they need access to supportive housing with services attached? Do they have family or social supports for reunification? Do they need short or long-term housing assistance? Do they need long-term rental assistance, right? How much rent can they afford? What is their projected employment upon release? And do they need connections to workforce, right? Or do they have limited work history? Oop, I think I skipped one. You want to reduce public violations related to living and working on the street. If one of my folks from my shelter is in the community and a police officer stops them, they actually have a card that they can show the police officer. The police officer will call me instead of giving them a citation, and we can deal with whatever's going on as a clinical issue as opposed to a criminal issue. We want to reduce recidivism short and long term. So we want to not just place people into housing, but good supportive housing. We want to help people stay committed to their treatment plans. The majority of people in prison feel a stable place to live is important for successful reentry, which increases inclusion in social networks and provides a sense of well-being. We want to support better outcomes for those with behavioral health issues because we know that it's going to significantly reduce recidivism and rearrest, and it's going to increase incidents of behavioral service use and reduce gaps in time from release to engagement. So the housing first, why housing first, right? So this is a little bit of a controversial thing. There are big proponents of housing first like myself, and there's people who challenge it. So the housing first approach really ensures that people experiencing homelessness, including those with serious mental illness, substance use disorders, and our criminal justice involvement, are quickly connected to housing with few or if any preconditions. It's a recovery-oriented approach to ending homelessness, centered on quickly moving people into independent or permanent housing, and then providing supports. So where the controversy lies is that when we say housing first, it doesn't mean housing only. It means housing with supports. But the idea is that if we're going to wait around for people to take medication, to stop using substances, to be ready for housing, people are going to remain on the street, they're going to remain unsheltered, and we're going to have much more horrible things going on for them, as opposed to getting them into housing and wrapping supports around them. And justice impact individuals who do not have access to permanent housing often cycle between shelter, jail, and hospitals. And housing first is a proven model in reducing homelessness. So this is actually a well-documented best services, and there are statistics and research that have been done to show this. So helping formerly incarcerated people find housing. Every incarcerated person should be connected to a reentry program in advance of release. And part of this process is finding housing immediately or soon after. So what can be helpful to do that is maintaining a database of housing options, shelters, halfway houses, low-cost rentals, providing accurate, up-to-date information on resources in that area, building relationships with local landlords, and we do have a speaker who's going to speak on that issue. Interview and assess your clients' needs and requirements, assist with those application processes, connecting them to resources to obtain furnishing if they need it, and stay connected and make sure that you follow up. I'm not going to say too much about this because we actually have a speaker on this, but I have to say that what's really important here is that developing a healthy and robust connection with landlords who will overlook background checks and poor credit really open up doors for people. Collaboration is helpful and communication is key. So if service providers work closely with law enforcement, parole, and probation, it can help break that cycle of incarceration, of homelessness and recidivism. And when everyone works together to ensure that their clients are stably housed, it encourages other agencies and housing providers to accept them for services. This is how to reach me. I actually have a website. I'm on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on email. This is my mobile phone. I'm always happy for people to reach out to me if you have more information that you'd like from me about our model. We actually love people to come and visit us. We're always really happy to tour a group, a city. We've had people come to us from all over the country. And actually, just 2 weeks ago, we had a group here from Sweden. Everyone is always invited. Please reach out to me. I would be more than happy to show you around. And with that, I'm going to hand this off now to our next speaker, who is Jessie Wilson. Jessie is the Senior Reentry Coordinator in North Carolina for Oxford House. We actually use Oxford House here. It's a wonderful program. So Jessie, take it away.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Jessie Wilson. I am a person in long-term recovery, and what that means to me is I have not found it necessary to use illicit substances or drink alcohol since January 21st of 2018. I am also the Senior Reentry Coordinator for Oxford Houses of North Carolina, and I also have lived experiences with unsuccessful reentry myself. So we're going to kind of talk about the Oxford House model, which is based on 3 core principles. Each Oxford House must be democratically run, meaning that each house is self-run. And by that, I mean, we vote on things as a house. A member has to be voted in and they have to be voted out. House membership is responsible for all household expenses. Each Oxford House in the nation has its own checkbook, its own bank account. We pay the bills ourselves, but it takes every member living in this Oxford House to pay an equal share each week. The 3rd core principle is each house must immediately expel or dismiss a member who has a recurrence of use, but all Oxford House members make an effort to provide safe options for members who are leaving. So a little history about Oxford House. Oxford House started, it was actually a government-funded halfway house in Silver Spring, Maryland in 1975. Well, the funds ran out and it was going to close down, and the men who was living in that particular house decided, well, we should run this house together and pay the bills ourselves. And ever since then, they saved up enough money with that particular house to open another one and open another one. And since then, we have over 3,300 houses across the nation, with 295 in the state of North Carolina. The first houses in North Carolina was Oxford House Durham in Oxford House Driver in Durham, North Carolina in 1991, and Oxford House Church Street in Asheville in 1991. An individual can live in an Oxford House as long as they remain abstinent from all substances. They contribute to the house solidarity by being part of the voting process and actually paying the equal amount each week as everybody else does, so that all bills can remain paid. Residents stay as long as they need to, as long as they do not exhibit disruptive behavior, do not have a recurrence of use, and continue to pay their equal share. We have houses available to both men and women with children. Some areas we do have men with children's houses as well. So our reentry program does have a history, and it started in 2005 whenever full-time outreach coordinator, Mr. Curtis Taylor, was awarded to be the part-time reentry coordinator as well. And that started in 2005. The first fiscal year, he was able to have 36 individuals re-enter society into Oxford houses. By 2012, he had expanded it and began working with around 15 correctional facilities in the state and was placing roughly 70 individuals a year. By 2018, when Curtis Taylor became the executive director of the Alcohol Drug Council of North Carolina, he had successfully locked in about 1,000 home plans since the start of it in 2005. In 2018, our program expanded to include 3 reentry coordinators, and today we have 3 still, and we're about to expand to 6 reentry coordinators, and we help about an average of 250 individuals reentering society through Oxford House each year. So we're busy. So as reentry coordinators, we bridge the gap between the correctional facilities and the houses. As you can imagine, Oxford House isn't your basic transitional living. We are solely recovery housing. And by communicating and cultivating these relationships with the case management staff and the program department of these facilities in North Carolina, we explain to them from the very beginning of our working relationship, we are not your basic transitional living. We are looking for a certain person. Not everybody's a candidate for Oxford House, but we work directly with these case managers on behalf of Oxford House to help these individuals continue their sobriety and continue their recovery outside of prison. You know, they have to identify with having substance use disorder to transition into an Oxford House. I know we do go into prisons all the time and conduct presentations, not only for the staff, so that we can make sure we stay on the same page about what an applicant may look like and what an applicant may not look like. The April is reentry month each year in North Carolina. It may be in the nation, I'm not too sure, but we visited about 11 prisons in the month of April. And we also have bi-monthly, and every 90 days we go into certain facilities and speak to a new group of men or women. So there are stages of this reentry process. First and foremost, I remember being incarcerated and I didn't have no options, which I will talk about that in a minute. But as I said, we cultivate these relationships with the case management staff, and they kind of know who we're looking for. And if this individual is sitting on the other side of their desk and says, I don't want to continue using illicit substances and I want to change my life, well, then she says, well, maybe Oxford House might be right for you. The application is not the basic house application that most people fill out, but it is a 5-page application that goes into great detail about the substances they used addictively, you know, the current crime that they're incarcerated for, you know, more about themselves. And then we set up an interview about 35 days prior to release. Now, this interview, we go into deep detail and we have to be very thorough because I'm a firm believer that the change happens in prison. For me and many others like me, we seek a different life because we're tired of feeling this pain, and prison is a very dark and negative environment. So during this interview, yes, we're talking about past convictions. I may ask about several assault or violent charges, and we can be able to see the infractions on the public information. What's this person's behavior like in prison as well? But if I feel comfortable advocating for that individual and helping him or her get into an Oxford House before release, and like I said, this reentry starts while the individual's incarcerated. But if I accept their interview and application, I will begin advocating for that individual to particular houses in the desired area 14 days prior to release. I know that's cutting it close, but a house can't technically hold a bed for no longer than 14 days due to it could put them in a financial spot. Then, being that our houses run democratically, we welcome them to conduct their own interview because the person would be living with them and they will be living with that person possibly. So then we coordinate with the case management and try to get a second interview. Once we lock in a home plan, that's whenever we do home plan coordination, we will send in the home plan to the case management, and the case management in return sends it to the county PPO to approve or deny the home plan. Once they arrive, we also do follow-ups, and other core members of houses within that Oxford House community come and make sure that person has what they need if they need help looking for work and continuity of care as far as successful reentry goes. our wraparound services. So I'm going to kind of start with building the subcommittees, and these reentry subcommittees that we have all through the state of North Carolina is individuals that has maybe came through this process, has been interviewed by one of us before they got into a house, or they're passionate about helping others like us because they have once, been incarcerated themselves. So these subcommittees are for support. The chapters, which is 4 or more houses in each area, make up a chapter. We have 34 chapters in the state of North Carolina. They most of them donate X amount of money each month to build this reentry fund, and this reentry fund may help with clothing. This reentry fund may help with the move-in fee that's associated with the equal expense share. And then we also have reentry backpacks that has the basic necessities, a nice little Oxford House logo on the backpack, but it has basic necessities as far as toiletry items, socks and towels, and also local resources. And that's where the subcommittees have actually made up resource packets to be able to give to these individuals and point them in the right direction of their needs. So I'm going to kind of touch on one of our success stories, Mr. Terrell Carpenter. He went through this reentry process, and my predecessor, Justin Losner, whenever he worked for Oxford House, interviewed Terrell while he was in prison. And Terrell was accepted into his first Oxford House in Asheville. And Terrell is a personal friend of mine, and that's where he began his recovery. He is affiliated with the 12-Step Fellowship. He also moved from Asheville to Wilmington to an Oxford House there, where he continued his recovery, and he has recently moved out. He got married. He's got his kids back in his life. And once upon a time, he didn't have them things. He is still abstinent from all substances today, and we're very proud of him. Yeah, they wanted me to do a personal testimony. I'm not a big fan of that, but my active alcoholism and my active drug addiction led me through some dark places, including prison, and that unfortunately is my mugshot to the left. Whenever I was coming up on release while I was incarcerated, I explained to my case manager, I said, I don't want to go back to where I was living because it's just an invitation to keep using alcohol and illicit substances. And he explained to me that as of right now, that was the only option. And it was an unsuccessful reentry because I did have a recurrence of use the day that I got released. By the grace of God, a month later, on April 21st of 2017, I was accepted into my first Oxford House. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home. The men welcomed me in. They pushed me into a 12-step meeting. And I began to see what life could look like without the use of alcohol and drugs. Unfortunately, I decided that I was going to move back home after my post-release, but I did come back, and I've been around ever since. I've lived in the Oxford houses for about 3.5 years and recently moved out, and now I'm married with my children in my life. So the barriers in bridging the gap, and we're all aware of barriers that individuals face for successful reentry. Well, IDs is a big one. DMV in North Carolina is usually backed up 3 to 4 months. You can get online and they, set an appointment, but it won't be until October or November here in North Carolina. Social Security card, IDs, birth certificates are real barriers to successful reentry. We see a lot of temp agencies be able to put a lot of folks to work without these. I don't know how they do it, but they do. But we see folks getting it right into work on the construction work, but the job site isn't recovery friendly. Now, federal facilities seem to be on top of this and make sure they have IDs and social security cards before they're released, but it seems like the state facilities are falling short. As far as continuity of care, mental health follow-ups, other types of medical care follow-ups. Lots of times reentry councils focus a whole lot on employment and education and bus passes, but seem to forget about healthcare. And that's where the continuity of care comes in. A lot of times folks go without follow-ups for their mental health or other medical needs and end up self-medicating, and that causes unsuccessful reentry. Community healthcare workers can bridge the gap. And I'm going to talk about the social determinants, and we've highlighted a couple agencies that has really made a difference here in North Carolina. So the Voices of Appalachia is prison reentry and bridging the gaps to social determinants to help tending to the whole person in every aspect of that person: family care, health care, employment, transportation, housing, education, economic security, social supports. And the FIT program is specific with working with folks with chronic illness. And the FIT program is in Orange County, which is Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and Mecklenburg County, which is in Charlotte. North Carolina. So we're going to kind of look at the cost to the state. I mean, for one individual that's being incarcerated for a year, North Carolina spends about $30,000 a year. Many Oxford House residents of North Carolina's last address was a correctional facility. With Oxford House, the inmate cost is reduced dramatically. So state contribution for each Oxford House resident averages around $500 a year. So you see the price difference. And like I said, many Oxford House residents' last address was a correctional facility. We have a lot of folks that went through the successful reentry and make up our communities within North Carolina. Now we're going to kind of get to the part where you kind of see how big of a deal. And we work with over 40 facilities. So you can imagine the volume of applications that we're getting, interviews all day long, helping find that person a place, an Oxford House to reenter society to. With that being said, these men and women depend on us. If I believe in this man or woman, or my counterparts believe in this man or woman, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that person comes from door to door, from the prison correctional facility to the Oxford House that day, and to have a safe and sober environment to live. So our referrals received as of 12/31/2021, from 2005 to the end of the year in 2021, we've had 3,285 referrals. The placements facilitated as of December 31st of last year was 1,974. Here's the fiscal year of 2022, and we broke it down in the quarters, and we do quarterly reports, and that's where the graphs and the pie charts you see on the right side are coming from. Now, we actually facilitated 257 successful placements this past year. So we're busy. I mean, there's no else way to put it. I really appreciate you guys letting me present about Oxford House and the reentry program. It was an honor to be here. And with that said, I will pass it to Miss Amy Dean Campmeyer.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jesse. As we have already heard a lot about housing and homelessness, I'm just going to build a little bit off of the things that Jesse and Julia have already started talking about. So I would like to start just a little bit with, let's see if I can move the screen forward for you guys, about the 4 approaches that we use, not solely in Kansas, but we use quite a bit in Kansas. So the first being what we call our master lease, or our transitional housing program. This is a program where the DOC contracts with private landlords throughout our state and our communities, or management companies. We don't limit just to landlords, to rent units. And units can be anything from a studio up to about a 3-bedroom. We don't like to go any bigger than that. And we'll talk a little bit about scattered site versus congregate living a little later on. And we partner with them, and we contract with them for typically about 3 years. And as the Department of Corrections, we are the leasee. We hold the rights to place or remove anybody during our leasing contract time. So the goal here really is to address the needs of that warm transition from the facility to the community, in order for that person to save up first month's rent, deposits, build a rental history. We will provide, excuse me, I'm losing my words here and I need to use my notes. We will provide excuse me, references. The houses are furnished. They are all bills paid. The individuals living in these units are there for 90 to 120 days to make that transition successful. While they are there, they are working with job specialists and housing specialists, peer support and/or recovery coaches to address the barriers, their goals, and their needs. The second is public housing authorities. This, as touched on in previous, this is an integral part of our process. We have a fantastic partnership with one community in Kansas specifically, who takes our public housing applications pre-released. They do the interview. They do all of the pieces necessary to put them on the list. Again, pre-release. So they're spending their time on the wait list while they're incarcerated. So they can release straight from incarceration to very affordable housing. It has been wildly successful. We are grateful to have that partnership, and we strive very hard to build that further in the state. We have what we call a supportive housing program. These are in 4 of our big counties. This population, or this program, targets the severe and persistently mentally ill population. So these are the ones that are high risk with mental illness. They have a history of substance use. They have a history of homelessness. They are typically very high in criminal thinking and attitudes and orientations. So this is an intensive wraparound service. We try very hard to put them into a housing situation that is the least restrictive for their needs. Meaning if they can live independently with a peer support and a case manager and a care coordinator coming in regularly to see them, then that's what we do. We use the same approach as we use to master leasing. We try and put them in the community with landlords that they would typically rent from as any other member of their community. And then we have landlord partnerships. We talked about these already and these are in the master lease and supportive housing programs as well. But we also have partnerships with landlords that aren't necessarily interested in entering into a contract with us as the Department of Corrections or focusing on any one type of population, but they are willing to entertain individuals that have a felony background, maybe have an eviction history, but they are open to listening. They're open to second chances. Maybe they have a history themselves, and so they are a little more forgiving and a little more understanding of the population. So what does a good master lease look like? I'm sorry, my slide is not, there we go. What does a good master lease look like? So when we are deciding where to place a master lease unit, we are looking for places that are affordable. We are looking for safe locations, scattered sites, areas of economic growth and opportunity, close to public transportation, all bills paid, furnished, handicapped accessible if we can get them. Handicapped accessible units are harder to come by than a typical unit. And then we'll talk a little bit about local versus large scale operations. So to go back a little bit, we want to make them affordable. We want to put people in areas and in locations and with landlords that have housing that is affordable for them. So we unfortunately know that our population would be, they don't typically make, the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're on the lower end. So we connect them to people, we connect them to landlords or property management companies that work in that area, that have options in their price range. We want the place to be safe. We believe that everybody, regardless of history, background, substance use, mental illness, any of the things, everybody deserves safe and affordable housing. So we want the location to be safe. And that means safe in the area of town that they're in, but also safe structurally. So when we enter into an agreement with somebody, we do a tour. We do a pretty thorough tour of the home prior. And we are not structural engineers by any means, but we look for making sure that the floorboards are intact, that the windows are in good working order, condition, that the doors close well, the stairs are solid, the appliances are, at least within this decade, right? We don't want gas leaking into the home. As far as the area is concerned, we don't put them on the corner of a well-known drug trafficked area, right? We really try and make them as safe as possible. Scattered sites. This is huge. And we have gone back and forth with this through the years. We had a really bad experience, actually. We entered into an agreement with for a 5-bedroom unit. The community that I was placed in immediately caught wind of that and did not like it. So that created safety concerns. It's created safety for the community, a perception of unsafeness for the community, but it also created safety concerns for the people living in the home. So from that moment, we really decided scattered site is better. Placing individuals where they are more integrated into the community, they have a better opportunity to assimilate in a community with their neighbors. They are not necessarily totally closed off to the people that are in their home. So they're able to interact with the average public person. We have found this to be much more successful. Communities are less fearful. Areas of economic growth and opportunity. This is also a huge one for us. We want to make sure where we have housing that they have opportunity to work. We don't want to put it so far out in the community or out in the county or so far in the sticks that there's nowhere for them to work. They have to drive an hour just to find employment. That doesn't make sense. And so we really strive to find locations that are already have a lot of economic opportunity or that are really growing. Same for public transportation. We want to make sure that they are near public transportation as best as possible. We in some of our more rural areas, this can be a little more difficult, but we try as best we can to put them close to whatever public transportation is in their area. All bills paid and furnished. I mentioned in the beginning when talking about master leases, we make this as easy as possible for them so they have no reason to spend money outside of their day-to-day living. All bills paid, furnished, so they can just focus on saving the money, building their skills, and finding their next permanent step. And then the local versus large scale. We have found that mom and pop, small organizations, small scale businesses tend to be more open, tend to be more willing to hear the story, tend to be more understanding of that the process is not linear for anybody. You get into bigger corporations and they have a lot more politics that are connected to their parent company, which is probably not even in the state that you're in. And they have these general broad rules because as a company, as a corporation, it's safest for them. So we try and stick local. We try and stick small. All right. How do we support this effort? There are lots of players at the table, and this list that is going to come is just kind of a small list of internal and external. Oh, I think I went too far. Internal and external, what I call players or partners. So internally, we have what we call housing specialists. These are dedicated staff. Their sole focus from day to day is to be the housing expert in their area. They build the partnerships, they maintain the master leases, they become a part of their community housing corporations, their committee meetings. They are the contacts for our facilities and our parole officers and our other community partners that say, hey, point me in the right direction of somebody that might be able to help us. We do keep lists, although I will tell you, landlords don't like to be put on lists, at least not in our state. But we do keep lists internally of landlords that have worked well with us in the past, landlords that are more willing to hear the story and to give somebody a second chance. We have job specialists. Similar to housing specialists, their focus is employment, all things employment. And that's anywhere from resume building, soft skills development, setting up interviews, even supporting somebody to an interview, finding the right resources. So if they need clothing to look appropriate, if they need to talk about hygiene, I mean, we really meet them where they're at to make sure that they have the skills necessary. We have programming that is specifically focused on employment that our job specialists are also trained to do. We have care coordinators. These care coordinators are pretty specifically tied to the supportive housing program, but they also reach out and support anybody that really needs that level of support in the communities, whether that's connecting to housing or any other service that they need. They're kind of masters of their community, if you will, of their community partners anyway. Discharge planners. I find these pretty integral. These are pre-release staff. They are housed in our facilities. And these folks really work on the Medicaid, Social Security piece of it. For those that do have physical or mental health conditions, to make sure that they have their medical needs met, but also have the benefits that they're entitled to. And then our SOAR specialists, which is the SSDI Outreach Access and Recovery Specialists. This is just an expedited process for Social Security, and we have internally, we unfortunately only have one of those folks, but she is amazing and is actually at a 97% approval rating. So she really focuses on those ones that have been denied time and time again, or maybe are truly very, very sick, but have never accessed services before. And then our external players. So obviously landlords, they are our primary, they're our primary external partner. We can't make this work. We can't make housing work without landlords. They kind of hold the key, right? Community mental health centers. These are phenomenal resources that are often overlooked. They have housing. They have housing of their own. They have funding for some housing. They have connections as well. So we don't come at this as a unilateral approach. To any of the things that I've discussed today is never a unilateral approach. We always almost have some sort of multidisciplinary group that are discussing the folks that are going through these programs. Other state agencies. So when I say other state agencies, this can mean any number of things. So we have what we call the Department of Health and Environment here in Kansas, and they are the keepers of what we call waivers. And waivers help folks with assisted services to remain independent. And while some may not think that's directly connected to housing, it very much is, in the sense of, if I don't know, or if I can't manage myself, if I don't know how to cook, or if I don't know how to clean, I can't live successfully independently. So we partner with them to ensure that the folks that we place in housing do have the services that they also need. Jesse mentioned driver's licenses and state IDs and birth certificates. So we also partner with the Department of Revenue and Vital Statistics here in Kansas. So we can obtain Kansas state IDs and or driver's licenses as it's appropriate, birth certificates and social security cards, all pre-release. So the person can walk out fully identified to have all of those things. And that's huge for us. That's huge for employment. That's huge for housing. That's huge for education. That's huge all around. So we're very lucky. We're very fortunate to have those. The Department of Revenue is a fairly new relationship that we've developed, but we are super excited and super blessed and grateful to have that. The one thing I did not list as an external partner, and that was oversight on my part, and I apologize, to workforce partners. Again, people can't, without money, without the ability to have money, people can't live successfully. So workforce partners, and whether this is through a mental health center, whether this is through our own job specialists, through, for us, it's the Department of Children and Families, so Voc Rehab, or just employers as a general rule, it is important to also partner with workforce. All right, so building the relationship. What does it look like to build a relationship with a landlord? It's hard, it's difficult. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. I was kind of watching some of the comments as Jesse and Julia were speaking. It's not easy, it's not fun always. It's not the most glamorous job, but really it starts with education, collaboration, and communication. I say often to people that I work with that if you think you're communicating enough, you probably actually are in fact not communicating enough, and you need to communicate more. Transparency and honesty. I can't harp on this one enough. You can't build a relationship without being honest and transparent. That doesn't mean every jot and tittle, every detail of every case, but it does mean being honest. If you can't do something, say you can't do that, right? Being open-minded to the people that you're working with, being open-minded to the partners and their beliefs and where they stand. Not everybody is a no, but not everybody is yes. Please bring me all of your criminal justice involved folks. Please bring me all your mentally ill folks. There's rarely do you get that. Consistency and accountability. So really where I think we find the most bang for our buck is in the education piece, helping our partners understand the difference in criminal histories, the difference in criminal convictions, maybe is a better term. And the best example I can use of that are sex offenders. Not every sex offender is the same, but as a general person who doesn't understand the system or maybe doesn't understand the conviction process, a sex offender is a sex offender and everybody's just like, nope, no, thank you, right? So we spend a lot of time educating folks on the criminal justice system, what it feels like, what it looks like, what we try to make it like to be an inmate or a resident. So we share some of the experiences of the folks that we worked with. Sometimes that is actually bringing in a formerly incarcerated person and having them share their story. Describe the prison settings, describe what it's like, describe the programs that are available to them, describe what we teach in those programs, why we teach those programs, what we hope the outcome will be of those programs. We've even gone so far as to offer tours of facilities so our partners can understand, can see firsthand what it's like. We answer questions asked. So this kind of goes to the transparency and the honesty piece of it. We answer questions asked as honestly as we can. Again, we can't, there's obviously some things that maybe we can't answer based on whatever restrictions for our agency or our department or our employer are, but we absolutely try and be honest and transparent. Finding a common language. This tends to be a huge barrier. I use language that is familiar to me in the Department of Corrections. People don't always understand that language. So finding the common language, being open to them saying, I have no idea what you're saying. Finding a way to make it common, finding a way to make it the same is helpful. We'll talk just a little bit on the next slide about funding, but I do want to say building a relationship, also being really clear on the funding piece, being really clear on how it works, where it's coming from, what the process looks like, super, super critical. Everybody cares about money. Everybody wants to know when they're going to get paid. Couple of other tips. Don't start with your most high-risk client. Go with somebody that is relatively easy, right? Celebrate the success with your partner. You have a person that you put in transitional, you maybe took a chance on, they got a job, they're saving money, they got promoted, they get to move up to their next location. Celebrate that with your person that you're the resident or the parolee or whatever term you use. Celebrate it with that person, but celebrate it also with your partner, because they work just as much as you did maybe to making sure that person is successful, but you also allow them to see the success. And then recognition of your partners. Pre-COVID, and we haven't done a great job since COVID, but pre-COVID, we used to try at least once a year, get our partners together in our communities. And this was housing partners and community mental health centers and recovery partners, and recognizing their partnership with us and the work that they've done to help make our communities safer and our folks more successful. Everybody likes to be recognized. And it doesn't have to be huge, right? Like, I'm not talking about throwing this big shindig, 3-course dinner, but you just certificates that you can make and to say thank you for you're appreciative of their participation, or if they've the star landlord of the community. Landlord circles are super small. So they all talk. And then always under promise and over deliver, always. All right. And then, so funding strategies. There are probably a million funding strategies, but these are the ones that we use most commonly in Kansas. So there's state general funds, and these are simply what they sound like. These are the funds that are allotted to us by our state. And out of that fund, housing gets a chunk of that. These are very static funds. They don't often change very much from year to year. We have grants. These are typically federal grants. We actually don't have any federal grants that are specific to housing. What I will say about this, however, is there are almost always room in most grants to include housing. Housing is part of the continuum of reentry. So if you have any grant that is related to substance use, mental illness, reentry as a whole, you can find a place to put in housing in there. And maybe it's targeted at one type of population, like one specific population. Or if you can write it, broad enough, you can include more things. And that's what we typically do. So the one that we use most as an example is a recovery grant, is a substance abuse grant. But we have found ways to make it broad enough that, we use language like history of substance use, and we include recovery coaches in that model and in that plan. Community partnerships, I touched on this a little bit with the community mental health centers. Partner with your agencies, partner with your local organizations. I stress enough, and I probably should have touched on this in the education piece, but these folks that are returning to the communities, they are community members first and foremost. They will not be parolees. Okay, 95% of them will not be parolees forever. But they are community members. They will be a part of this community for the rest of their natural lives. So we can shun them or we can help them. But at the end of the day, they're going to continue to need the support of this community. So pulling in your shelters, your churches, your community mental health centers, your local day programs, whatever that is, and sharing, share the burden a little bit. If you can pay for this month's rent, we'll pay for this month's rent, all the while we're working towards something more permanent for that person, whether that's disability, whether that's employment, combination of the two, whatever that looks like. But if you share the burden, it's not so big. And then Social Security and Medicaid, while this isn't necessarily a funding stream, these are very important funding pieces for the individual themselves. All right, really I will say the one downside, if there is such a thing to grants, is that they can be kind of a heavy lift from the administrative side. Data is super important. Data is super important anywhere you go, but grants are very data driven, very outcome based. So just keep that in mind as you move forward with that. So here's my contact information. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. I'll be happy to give anybody my phone number that would like it, but emails are typically the best way to get a hold of me. I have also included a link to our annual report. There's a lot of data in there about housing and our population as a whole. So feel free to click on that and peruse that at any point you would like. And I think I'm supposed to forward it one further slide for the Q&A. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And if our presenters could come back on the camera, we will take some time for some Q&A. I do want to acknowledge that we will be emailing out the slides for these presentations to anyone who registered. And when we have notification that SAMHSA has posted recording to SAMHSA's YouTube, we send that notification out to the entire Gaines listserv. So I'll share a link to help you all sign up for the Gaines listserv if you haven't done so already in a couple of slides. Yes, we will pin we'll actually just plop the certificate in the chat So hang on and watch for that in the chat. We will put the certificate of attendance directly in the chat. You can download it there. So there, just a little bit of housekeeping. And now to address some of the many questions that came in, and we will not have time to get to all of these, but just so you all know, I am referring to the Q&A pod. So if you put a question in the chat that you really want to have answered, go ahead and plop it in the Q&A and I'll be more likely to see it there. So first of all, thank you so much to all of our presenters for sharing this wonderful information. And I have benefited from learning from the different types of programs offered today. So to dive into some of these questions, I think that one thing that has come up several times is the HUD's definition of homelessness and how that impacts folks. So I want to start with Julia to answer that question and how they overcome that issue, but also then I'll open it up to Jesse and Amy if you have anything else you'd like to add. Julia?
Sure. So I know that there's other answers to this. I can only really speak to what we do. So one of the things that's really helpful is that if you come into shelter, you're going to meet the criteria for homelessness. So that's another reason why probation and parole, if you're coming out of incarceration, right, you're going to lose your homeless status and all of that, even out of jail if you've been there for out more than 90 days. So by coming into our facility, because you're in a shelter now, it's going to open that up for you for other options. And this is the thing too, to be in the shelter, you need to just be in the shelter, the night before you were homeless, and we can certify it. So being able to certify whether you're in the shelter or even if you're unsheltered, we have a PAC team that does this. So being able to certify is a very important piece of that. But I think that's what makes us really important, is because we're not requiring the HUD definition to get into the shelter. And some shelters do. And I think when you do that, you're cutting out the whole reentry piece. So we're happy to do that by making our folks eligible for the vast number of services that are open to people who are homeless.
Thank you for that. So I don't think it's as relevant for Jesse's program, but definitely Jesse, if you have anything else you want to chime in about the HUD definition, if that impacts people's ability to get into your program, and then Amy will end with you, any comments you have.
So I don't know much about the HUD program, I'll be honest, but I seen a question that said, who funds Oxford houses? I think that's a great question. Each Oxford house, we rent from landlords just like anybody else would. We pitch the idea to somebody trying to rent a house big enough for 8 to 10 individuals to live in, and we explain the model to them. But we rent from houses. Oxford House Incorporated does not own any houses. We rent from landlords just like anybody else would. So that is a good question, and we get a lot of no's before we get that one yes, and that's just the way it is. But a lot of times we cultivate relationships with these landlords to where they want to rent us more other houses, and that's so forth and so on.
Okay, thank you for that. And hold that thought because I want to come back to that. So Amy, anything you wanted to add regarding the HUD definition of homelessness, if that impacts any of the programming that you all do?
It does not. For the programs that I mentioned, it does not. We don't have any barriers as far as that's concerned.
Mm-hmm. So for all of you listening, all 3 of the programs that we're sharing today are some ways that you could potentially overcome that barrier and get people to a place where they could potentially qualify for HUD housing. So to get back to the landlord partnerships, because it looks like that is a big issue and people are interested in that. And we heard from Amy regarding developing relationships with landlords, but I'd like to hear from Julia and Jesse as well. So Jesse, could we circle back to you, and could you give us any more details or tips on, how do you cultivate those relationships with the landlords? How do you build trust there? Anything else you'd like to add for folks that are looking to establish those relationships with landlords in their communities?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, whenever we approach landlords and speak about Oxford House model, a lot of times they're very reluctant to rent to 8 to 10 individuals in recovery. I think after they see that our model's been working since 1975 and that, each house is fully self-run and self-supporting, that, their rent's on time every month, it's paid. We have had some issues where some landlords explain, so do you mean felons will be living here? And I'm like, well, individuals in recovery will be living here. I think finding the open-minded person, and a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, this day and time, most everybody is affected indirectly or directly by substance use disorder, somebody in their family. A lot of times we go in and we speak to these landlords, and it means a lot to them that we're even there, because they say, okay, well, I have a son that here recently, we spoke to a landlord, he said, my son deceased from a fatal overdose. So, and keeping their house up, I'm always advocating to the residents, this is your home. This is your home, change the air filters. We want to be the best looking house on the street. A lot of times these men and women take great pride in their home, and the landlord sees that type of thing as well.
Thank you. Julia, could you share anything about your approach?
Sure. I loved what Amy said about little certificates and recognizing. People love recognition. So I work for government. It's not hard for me to get a certificate from the county executive. People love that, or a picture with someone here. That goes such a long way to be that civic, pride that you're helping to make something better. So a lot of my work is around recognizing people that are assisting us and making a big deal about it. I put it all over my social network. I think that's such an important thing that Amy talked about. Don't forget that piece. And I think the other thing that we've done really well here is that the landlords that we have relationships with, if you're having a problem, you call me, I'm going to solve that problem for you. I'm either going to get resources for that person in that housing, or I may have to bring that person back to shelter and rehouse them with more supervision, which keeps the landlord from having to evict them. So there's lots of different ways, but if you make it easier for the landlord to speak with you. Also, I work for the housing authority, make sure they get paid on time, make sure that there's people communicating with them. I think landlords truly appreciate that, because from regular renters, they don't have that. They don't have a conduit, a bridge, a liaison. We provide that because we value our landlords. And I think at the end of the day, landlords can be as Jesse talked about, like one of my most chronically homeless guys, he was on the streets for 20 years. We finally housed him. The landlord and his wife bought him like all these supplies for his apartment. And it was like such a beautiful thing. They want to be involved, but if we engage them and we support them and they support us, that really is the best of both worlds. But it's more work to do that. But in the end, I think it's really worth it.
Thank you. So just continuing to talk about those relationships with the landlords, one concern that we often hear is, well, people with substance use disorders, they're going to tear up my house. They're going to be violent. So how do you respond to those concerns? So again, well, this time let's start with Jesse, and then we'll go to Amy and Julia.
Well, of course, being a landlord, they want their property taken care of. They want their property well maintained. And whenever that's a fear of a landlord, well, I'm afraid to rent this house to this individual because I'm afraid they'll tear it up. Well, I think that's going to have to add me to be more accountable with the residents of each Oxford house, because if we take care of their house and be respectable citizens of the community and productive members of the society, we got to take care of the landlord's house. And that's how we've cultivated, because there's been reluctant landlords that said, okay, well, we'll try this. And then seeing how the resident, the men or the women of that house took care of the house and said, okay, well, this thing really works. And trust is to be earned.
Yes.
And that's really, trust is to be earned.
I very much agree with everything Jesse said. I think appreciating where they're coming from. Again, it's about being open-minded, right? But it's also reminding them that somebody that doesn't have a criminal history, somebody that doesn't have the things that are coming along with the person that we're advocating for can also damage property. Again, reminding that they're a human, and that the guy walking in behind me, who you have no information on, no amount of support for, can do the same or more damage. And it's not a matter, and I say that, but I want to also caveat that with, it's not a matter of right and wrong, right? But it's just reminding that they are human, and then being responsive, right? Having the officer, having the parole officer, having the care coordinator come to the house, be responsive, understand where they're coming from. If there is an issue, kind of like Julia said, we're going to take care of it. We're going to respond. We're going to remove the person if we need to remove them. Yeah.
So one of the things that I know that Dr. Stein had mentioned that I'm the chair of the board for Newbridge, so I'm going to do a little plug here. By being part of our county hospital, which provides our detox services and substance abuse services, I have really been able to, within an hour, 2 hours, get people into detox to make sure that, and I think having those healthcare relationships too, when we're talking about substance use, when a person's ready to get help, they're not ready to wait a week. When they're saying, yeah, I'm ready to get help, and maybe they're saying, yeah, I'll go in, you want to make that as easy as you can for them. Again, not creating obstacles, not creating hoops. So I think that for me is that I look at it like, if someone's having symptoms of a mental illness, then we're going to look at how to help them with those symptoms. Well, it's the same thing with substance. Those are symptoms of an addiction, and we want to help them. So making services available, making them accessible, making them low barrier, because you could have a place go, hey, this guy was just here a week ago. And I'm like, yep, and they're here again. So we're going to treat them again and again and again and again until it works. Helping healthcare to understand how to work with our folks is been a passion of mine. By doing grand rounds at hospitals, I did one for Rutgers, to really be like, understanding that this takes a village. This doesn't take one of us. It takes all of us working together. And they might need this thing this day and that thing another day. And yes, it's a lot of resources and a lot of work, but having them unsheltered, having them in a hospital, having them in jail, that is all more costly and not as effective. So keeping people in their housing, intervening when we need them, that's really what this takes. And it takes a tremendous amount of dedication. And when something doesn't work, because I heard somebody say on the chat, housing first, I've had good and bad. Of course, but this is the thing. It's about everybody needing a different thing. And maybe you do something and somebody gets housed and that doesn't work. Well, then you know what? The next time you house them, it's a different look. It might be a Section 8 the first time, that didn't work. Then we would do a shelter plus care that came with case management and more services. So it's really about finding what works for the person and being okay to make mistakes, and being okay when the person, it's not a person fails. It's about, okay, so what else? It's a process, and helping our landlords understand that, but also understanding that they're not in it alone, that we're here with them to go through this process. Not only helps that individual, but opens up a door for the next person, because they know that you're not going to bail on them. You're going to be there when they need you to help, get people connected to services when they need them.
Thank you for that. And someone asked, well, is there a criteria that landlords need to meet? So I'm just wondering, is there any kind of criteria or list that you go by to screen out potential landlords you think might not be optimal for working with this population? Amy?
So, I don't want to say that there's a super formal process or list. I think that's where the housing specialists are really important in our process here in Kansas. Is they are super familiar with their housing areas. So we have, I would suspect as many, we have those quote unquote slumlords. The folks that don't want to fix their, when they have a maintenance request, they don't want to come and fix it. They are not responsive when a person calls and says, hey, I have an issue. They tend not to report rent money appropriately. So we look at those types of things. There are some times that we are approached to enter into a contract or be on the list, if you will, of felon-friendly housing opportunities from those types of individuals. Now, we obviously can't deny somebody necessarily to stay there. However, we will give them the caveat of this is not a recommended place, right? We wouldn't put them on our list of recommendations. We as a Department of Corrections would not enter into a contract with somebody like that. Because again, we want the person to feel safe, and that's safe all around. We want to make sure that if they're paying their rent and their way of paying rent is through a money order, that when I give it to them, that it's actually going to go to rent and they're not going to come back at me at 3 months later and say, oh, you haven't paid your rent in 3 months. So safe in that respect as well. Does that help?
Thank you. Julia, do you want to add anything to that? And then we'll end with Jesse.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again? I just got stuck looking at a chat.
Oh, we were asking if there's anything you use to screen out landlords.
So one of the, I agree with Amy, like we need our landlords, so we don't want to make that too hard. But because I work for the Housing Authority, if you're coming into something that's subsidized by us, there are rules that are more about the actual room, right? It's more about the unit. And I think that's important because we don't want our folks living in substandard housing, anything that's dangerous. So it's more about that than the landlord. But I am sure that I can tell you that if somebody lets the Housing Authority know that something isn't working, they do have, a caseworker that's assigned to them that's going to check in with that landlord, because that's being paid for by HUD funding. And so there are rules around that. And those landlords like getting that money every month, so they're more likely to actually come into compliance. So it's less about, them and more about the unit and how the unit's being managed. I will say this, though, there is a growing need in this country for litigation for landlords that are discriminating against our folks. That is what happens is all of us who do housing, we're so busy trying to lease somebody up before their voucher runs out that we don't have the time to say, hey, you're discriminating and we're going to get an attorney. And so it goes kind of unaddressed. But I do think that's something we really have to look at, because there's definitely discrimination across many different ways against the folks, whether it's their criminal background. I will tell you something we do right now at my housing authority is that criminal background is not looked at until a preliminary offer of housing has been given. And that's something that's being done in the state of New Jersey. And it happened during COVID. I really applaud that. It's wonderful. That way you're making sure that you're not discriminating against someone because they have a criminal history. And that's something would be great if we could do that nationally, but one step at a time.
Absolutely. Well, we are at the end of our time. Ashley Sabatino just dropped the attendance certificate in the chat. So you can click on that to download it directly to your computer. Let's see, I think someone named Jesse just chatted. So the link is right above your chat. So folks, go ahead and look in the chat. And if you aren't able to download it, then you can reach out to the Game Center directly. If we'll go to the next slide, I think we have a link. So here, you can just type this web link in your favorite browser. It will take you to the Game Center, and there we have contact information. You can reach us directly through that website if you aren't able to download the attendance certificate, and you can get it from us later. Let's see. There's also a link there for signing up for the listserv if you haven't done that. And so again, the link is on the screen if you want to sign up for a listserv or contact us. And the certificate is in the chat under Ashley Sabatino. Thank you so much, Julia, Jesse, Amy, for your time today, for sharing your programs with us. So much helpful and rich things going on in your communities that I know everyone has benefited from learning from today. We're hoping to see a proliferation of all these ideas across the country. And thank you so much today for your time and your expertise. And with that, we'll bring this webinar to a close. Thank you all for participating and hope to see you at the next games webinar. Have a good afternoon.